In the book of Daniel, chapter 5, in the King James Version. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, Whosoever shall read this writing, and shew me the interpretation thereof, shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they cannot read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. And the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and shewing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will shew the interpretation. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not shew the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee, that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him, whom he slew, and whom he kept alive, and whom he set up, and whom he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild mules. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified? Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. And that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Okay, so there was a lot here, sermon upon sermon, quite a bit of information here. In fact, there's several different, a lot of different things, and I encourage you to read chapter 5 again, because there's quite a many of different points in here for our lives. One thing that is telling, and in verse 21, you may have seen the A word, AS word, and this is YouTube, so again, I try to avoid a lot of these words, these nostalgic words that were used for like mules and oxen and donkey and such. And so that's why, but I saw it too. And one day there may be a version where I'm able to just go through and just read verbatim exactly those words. So yes, I did see that as well. But I do my own little, in my mind, as soon as I see it, I will switch it to mule just in case, because we never know. And so, but reading this, Daniel was giving the son some information. First and foremost, when I read this, I read it as in this king, even though his wife was telling him information that he wasn't aware of, or may have been ignorant to it. In a way, when I read this, I see him as kind of like, even though he was shaky, even though he was frightened, and this was above his I was about to say above his pay grade. Certainly it was, but but above his, and in that case, even that term, even used today, is just horrifyingly horrible. So it was knowledge above what he could understand, but could still be taught. And so he did not know these things, and he had brought in all these wise men, and then his wife comes and tells him information and tells him that there still is a person within the kingdom that can enlighten him as to potentially enlighten him as to, or actually she was just saying yes, he can, so enlighten him as to what this was. And through his scaredness, and when I read this, he points out some things to Daniel, that he's heard these things about him. In verse 12, for as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and shewing of hard sentences and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will shew the interpretation. So his wife was telling him, this person was utilized very much by your own father. And he continues, then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake and said unto Daniel, art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? So when I read this, there's a little bit of a mockery that when I'm reading it, some people interpret it as just a fact check. When I read this, he was in the palace. This is Nebuchadnezzar's son. So it wasn't like Nebuchadnezzar was completely ignorant to all of these facts. Maybe he was not always included in the royal council and such, because typically the king and the king only, not even the queen. But the queen even knew of his own wife. So Belshazzar's own wife knew of Daniel. And Daniel was originally, yes, he was a high position within even his father's council. And so yet, here he is, here's the son, and Daniel appears to have been removed and not even a thought, not even an afterthought. But thankfully, because of his wife told him these things, and then they summoned Daniel, and he's telling him, aren't you part of the people that my father conquered and brought here into captivity? Aren't you part of those people? And starting off on acknowledging, like, as in that he's nothing. When I read it, the arrogance of the son Belshazzar comes out, and this is why he requested the gold and silver dishes and plates and cups that were very, very that were used in the temple of the Lord. But he decided, you know what, let's use these because I want to, and you know what, they're better than what we have, so let's just use these things. And who cares if they were blessed, and who cares if they were consecrated items that were given to the Lord, because he didn't really believe in the Lord. Nebuchadnezzar's son didn't care. So there was an arrogancy and a pompous about him. And then it was kind of like this information from his wife came, and he's like, well, whatever. I'm worried already. But with that worriness, there's still that arrogancy that's still there. Sometimes you have a worriness and like a scaredness. And that scaredness brings that timidity, and that also allows for someone to start understanding and either knocking down their own wall from either stereotype or being someone who is purposely not wanting to understand, purposely ignorant. But in this case, it was an upholding even through his fear. Even though he was in fear, he was upholding his own pompous. Okay, so he first starts off saying, aren't you that person that is from where was brought here in captivity? So way to go on, your first encounter with someone, and you're already talking down to them. Just to let you know where the son was in his thought process and how he treated other people. I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. Again, when I'm reading this, he's repeating what people have just told him, but when I'm reading this, he's spouting it out as in like it's a joke. So, and he continues on, and he's like, he's already given the award, and they don't, during this time, they don't typically back down on something that they've said that they proclaimed was going to be done for whoever resolves the issue. So that's why he repeats in 16 in verse 16, what he will do. So Daniel, whom I believe continually walked in the spirit, continually worshipped and praised God, he understood the assignment. He understood, and that's why he there wasn't a moment that he didn't seem to not know what was going on when he entered the situation, even after that introduction from the king. Okay, so he says a couple of things here. He says in verse 18, "O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor." A kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. So he's saying God did this for your father. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him, whom he would slew, and whom he would kept alive, and whom he set up, and whom he put down. But during his father's time, remember, his father was also proud and arrogant. So his son is really, really showing that the apple didn't, as the term saying, the apple didn't fall far from the tree, because that pompous and arrogancy was definitely seen by his own son and now reflected in his own son. But there's a difference between Nebuchadnezzar and his son. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Okay, so then it says, "And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild mules. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will." And then he says, "So your father humbled himself, but you, and thou his son, O Belshazzar, has not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this. Okay, bringing past to present. There's a lot here. A lot. So there's a couple of different things to look at in the spirit. There's one thing to be ignorant of a situation and follow through in life and not understand until after the fact, after circumstances arise, and then learn that. And then it's another to know the circumstances and yet continue on following a path or following an opinion or following in a way that is destructive. So, you know of the fruits of the Spirit, and yet you choose not to follow the fruits of the Spirit. You know what it means to help one another, but you choose not to help everyone. You're to help everyone, but you choose not to help everyone because there are now standards. Those standards are from who? You choose that there should be boundaries when it comes to a lot of things, instead of not having boundaries, instead of being able to live amongst a community or being allowed to have others live amongst yourselves. And that includes family, that includes your immediate family, that includes your thoughts and feelings, what we think are things that are protecting ourselves. Because remember, Belshazzar was doing all of this out of fear. With the fear, instead of allowing for the compassion and the empathy and the understanding to come in, he refused. He refused to humble himself. Therefore, he kept his pompousness and his arrogancy. And because of that pompous and arrogancy, these writings this prophecy through this writing was going to come true, and it does. The days were numbered. The time of his reign over the kingdom was going to come to an end. The wages of sin is death. And it's not the death that we think of when it comes to the ceasing of life. It is talked about in the book of Revelation. So, when we are in the Spirit, when we are loving thy neighbor, when we are helping one another, when we are understanding and having empathy and compassion for one another and wanting to, remember, Daniel wasn't like, I'm not going to help this person. This person is so pompous and arrogant. He was like, you know what? I'm going to help him because it's going to be still up to him whether his arrogancy is going to continue. And the Lord has already revealed to me that yes, his pompous and arrogancy is going to continue. So, and that was Daniel, because Daniel was, the word of the Lord was being spoken through him. The Spirit of the Lord, the Holy Spirit, was being spoken through him, and things were revealed to him. Bring past to present. When we go about in our walk with the Lord, really think about what it looks like when we make a decision that does not reflect walking with the Lord, following in the steps of Christ, bearing the fruits of the good Spirit, the good fruit that shows up as pompous, arrogancy, gluttony, no compassion, complicit. Whereas Daniel was there. And so much so that people that you wouldn't think, even people who may not even worship God, recognized and understood. Belshazzar's wife recognized and understood who Daniel was. Whether she believed or not, she provided her husband that information. She provided the wise men, the people who were in the king's council, that information. And Belshazzar, the king decided, hey, what is there to lose? So really think about those things when we are walking in our life. You see that there is pompousness and arrogancy when we ourselves aren't reflecting things that we talk about. But when we are walking with Christ, even people who don't believe will see it and will recognize that person. I hear things about Christ, and I hear things that he is good and that he helps the poor and he helps the people and he's compassionate and has empathy, and he listens and he does good. Well, that person kind of reminds me, because I see that in them. Before we go on, though, what kind of thoughts or feelings come to your mind when you read of this? How does it make you feel, and what does it make you think?